So this video we're going to have a discussion about using terrain and theater of the mind in your role-playing game. This is DMG, welcome back to Quest Givers, and again we're being joined by Jeff Dee, an artist, game designer, an all-round great RPG enthusiast. He's from monkeyhousegames.com, creator of Villains and Vigilantes, unigames.us, creator of Bethorm, the Plane of Tecumel RPG, and Cave Master, a Neolithic RPG, which is fantastic, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
Do you have any questions for Quest Givers? Become a tavern regular by asking a question using video on social media. New modules will be available on the 1st of every month on questgivers.com, with the complete campaign Kickstarter launching September 1st. You're sure to get hooked on adventure.
So Jeff, I thought we'd start off by having a little definition of what we believe terrain to actually be, and what theater of the mind is. Because obviously this channel, one of our things is we are talking a lot more now to new players, because I think there are far more new players to RPGs now than there are actually old players. So these sort of things kind of need those definitions. So for you, what when you're playing a game, what is terrain?
Oh, it's not a thing I worry about. So I think I should talk more about what things I do that other people tell me are over some kind of a line, right? There are people who prefer not to have anything on the tabletop that is like a board or like a visual representation of what's actually going on, right? They like it to be all in their heads. See, to me, I'm very comfortable with, a vinyl grid pad that we draw on with wet erase markers. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with little set pieces out there. I'm comfortable with people who are familiar with Villains and Vigilantes know that it always used to come with little cardboard counters for everything. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with miniatures. We talked, I think, about Cave Master last time, and I may have mentioned that when we were first playtesting it, we actually tried to use rocks for our miniatures, the way cavemen would have, which, they're not real accurate depictions of the characters, but they serve the purpose of marking a place on the tabletop and distances between things, and you can establish lines of sight and other details of what would actually be going on, and there are people who can't stand any of that, right? And I'm comfortable with all of that for me personally, up until the point where there's so much paraphernalia on the table that just getting it all out there gets in the way, right? For me, all of that stuff is just one big category of depictions of what's actually going on in some concrete way, instead of just leaving it all in the players' heads.
So would you say it's like anything that visually represents something in the game, whether loosely or well defined, so like a miniature versus a rock, anything that's used to basically represent something in the game on the table is essentially terrain?
It falls into the same category. I don't know if
it's on a spectrum.
I know there are folks who actually make terrain, right? And they would probably like for that to be a little bit more specifically using, well-crafted set piece kind of things. But I think that the objections that some gamers raise to such things extend beyond, just the question of having something that looks nice all the way out to, well, having anything at all that shows you where things are, how far apart they are, and cares about reinforcing the GM's description of what's going on with visuals.
Well, right? That would be, to me, I mean, obviously I run a channel and, I mean, groups of people that create terrain. So, you know, obviously I'm firmly in the terrain camp, but, you know, obviously, you know, people are going to vary with their usage in terms of, you know, what it is they're going to put on the table. And I think it's important to try it, because some people won't even attempt it. It's like sacrilegious. But I mean,
I know. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, I grew up in a little town, a half-hour's drive south of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Right? Within the first year after Dungeons and Dragons was published, my eldest brother, who was in high school, found out about it, and we started going up to the hobby shop that was part of TSR Hobbies in those days, and buying our things. And you know, right away, when we gamed, we were using a grid on the table, and we were using miniatures and all of this stuff. And yet there are people running around today who claim that originally role-playing games were all theater of the mind, and these miniatures are, you know, some new thing that was added that is not as pure as the original way. And they're mistaken. Now, they may have played that way, and it's certainly possible to play RPGs without any of that stuff, and I don't have any objection to other people playing RPGs without that stuff. I just find it to be so convenient and so helpful for communicating that that I'll go ahead and use it. But, you know,
well, some people...
I don't know if there are people on our end of the spectrum who then lash out in the other direction and say, no, you people playing only in your minds are wrong. I don't want to say that. That's fine if they want to play that way. They just shouldn't lie about their way being the one true way.
Yeah, I mean, so, I've heard that argument as well. People say, oh, no, in the beginning it was all theater of the mind. So, well... Some of the some of the monsters were created because that's the monster they found in a packet, wasn't it? You know, that was like stuff from China.
It was actually gumball machines. Yeah, those in Australia, I assume. Yeah, little rubber Chinese toys that you could get in a gumball machine in those days. Turned up like the Rust Monster. It was a weird lumpy creature with a tail with a propeller on it and a couple of big antennas. You know. So yes, I don't know why anybody needs to fight over this, but apparently some people do. I have a suspicion that part of it is simply budget, right? And I'm totally sympathetic to people who want to go ahead with their hobby and not feel like they're obligated or like they're doing it wrong or they're somehow doing a lesser form of the hobby if they can't afford minis or the time to paint them or other things on the tabletop. And they shouldn't feel bad. That's one of the great things about role-playing games is that there is a really wide range of ways you can approach that at the table. So it's all good.
To me, terrain has always been something that adds to the enjoyment of the game. It's not something, to me, that actually detracts or subtracts from the experience, because it's really a shared experience. And when you've got something in front of you that kind of is representative of what it is you're talking about, it's much easier to actually discuss the problem at hand. You know,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, and of course, now there's a further issue that comes up for me when I go to run events at conventions. Right, I am there as a game publisher, and I'm there to get the word out about my games, as well as actually I need to meet the fans and stuff. So we try to make a bigger effort to have terrain and things on the table at a convention, because then it's the spectacle of what you're doing too, right? A bunch of people sitting around a table with pieces of paper and pencils in their hand is not as interesting as a bunch of people with paper and pencils and some mountainscape with flying creatures on stands and things going on. Maybe little cardboard circles showing explosion patterns that have just gone off. All that stuff is neat to look at, and so I make a special effort at a con. But even at home, it's easier to share the experience if you've got common points of reference, and to me, that's what it's all about.
Well, there's even a move now, and my co-creator of this channel, DM Scotty, he at the last con he went to ran a game which had multimedia elements. So he'd have a screen and he would show clips of footage and played music and all this kind of thing. So it's extended beyond just some cardboard things in front of you to like a full experiential thing. So I don't know whether that would be included in terrain, but that's kind of where it's going.
I think that's. I'm glad you brought that up, and that's kind of additional stuff that I expect some people would have an objection to for their own reasons, whatever they are. But
heresy.
I would include audiovisual stuff in the same category of things that go a little bit further to try to make the experience more shared. Like we will, I run a superhero campaign. My players spent several hours browsing the internet to try to find a good song to use as their theme song, and so we have that played periodically. Sound effects are sometimes a thing, or theme music for it's a battle, so put on the battle music, and you can find tons of this stuff on YouTube. Some intentionally made for that purpose, and others perfectly serviceable if you go out and find them.
Well, there's companies sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's companies like Sirenscape that actually make role-playing soundboards for your phone or computer, so you can actually hit metal strikes and get ambient sounds of the bog, and you can do all of those things. So I think that's
that's all fine. I don't know why anybody wants to make a big fuss about it, but it certainly, I don't think anybody should feel that they're doing anything less, or they're some kind of demonstration of their failings as a gamer if they don't go into that, because you can play without it and you can still have a good time. We've been over that.
So that then would bring us to what is theater of the mind. So do you have I'm sure you have detailed files.
What do you mean?
Having experienced these sort of players, have you got some input as to what the other camp feels?
It's obvious what they're talking about. It's everything we're doing when we don't have a piece of terrain, right?
Exactly.
It's then having to describe things, and also credit where it's due, being able to describe things in a clear enough way and get everybody on the same page without any props is a skill, right? And that's a perfectly valid skill that they can be proud of. And all of us need to have some of that, because at whatever level of props we're using, there's going to be stuff that you just don't have, right? Random encounter table says you encountered a I don't know, some kind of weird demon. I just don't have a mini of that, and so we're gonna have to describe it to you, and then maybe put something on the table that doesn't look right, and boom, off we go. So I mean, there is some theater of the mind going on, whether we intend to go that way or not, because we're not on a holodeck, right? And so some things are just going to have to be described, and people are just going to have to get on the same page the old-fashioned way.
Well,
and that's fine.
The best graphics processor in the world is the one between your ears.
Yeah.
Although I have found, and I mean, this is anecdotal, but there are actually people who can't actually think visually. So they actually do need something in front of them to kind of understand what's going on, because they can't actually think spatially in their mind, which is not a failing. It's just a different different type of thought process, or a different way that their mind is constructed. And a lot of those people, they can't handle theater of the mind because they don't have this point of reference to work with. So it does. I mean, obviously it's a smaller set of the population, but for people like us who are artistic, who have the visual minds, obviously it's much easier for us than it is for someone who doesn't have that ability.
Right. No, that's a great point. So, generally speaking, I mean, a lot of things that people think are problems or needs or obstacles are they're matters of taste, they're matters of individual comfort, and they're just because an individual needs things a certain way does not mean that it must all be that way, and that's a good thing. And I would encourage everyone to just embrace that freedom and flexibility instead of getting all bent out of shape about it.
Yeah, just doing it one way, always the same way, not having any kind of variety, to me, that lessens the experience of everything in life, really. If you only ever ate one type of food, I only ever eat this, then it's like, well,
I can think of foods for me that would be fine with them as my diet forever. Might need some vitamin supplements, but but it's also okay if people are comfortable with doing things a particular way. It's great for them. We don't have to have a fight about it. Great, do it your way, and the other guy will do it his way, and it's all good.
It only really becomes a problem when you do want to fight about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think we got into, last time I was on, I think we got into my concerns about the hobby in general, and there are people who want their role-playing experience to be more of a board game, or an all-inclusive set of rules that covers everything and sort of limits the need for a GM. And at the other end of the scale, you've got people who don't want mechanics. They want it, or if there are mechanics, they want those mechanics to be about making a story directly, rather than the mechanics handling the physics of the world. And in my opinion, that's two camps who have each seen the other as a problem. And what I love about the hobby is that combination of those things in the middle, right? Where there is an unfolding story, but it's not all about just unfolding a story. It's about doing that and having some sense of validity provided by mechanics that you have. So if you succeed at a thing that was difficult or unlikely, you know that, and it's not just about, was it your turn to say what happened, right?
Well, it's like the which is better, Star Trek or Star Wars? Why do I need to choose?
Yeah, I wouldn't make that analogy myself, because a better analogy there would be like, okay, there's science fiction, right?
Yeah.
And in the genre of science fiction, there's some things that follow established physics, right? And then there are other things that are speculative, right? Let's take psychic powers, right? There's a real fair question about whether there really are such things in the real world, and whether, it doesn't matter how many hundreds of thousands of years you are in the future, that might never become a thing, right? A lot of science fiction has both of those elements, right? But if we had two camps form, and one said, why no, you must have only things that are established physics, you've limited your science fiction a lot to, it's barely speculative at all, right? It's just extrapolating on the known. And at the other end of the scale, you can say, well, all that established physics stuff is, very constraining, so let's have it all be made up psychic weird things constantly. And now you've got two extremes, in my opinion. They're fine, just like these two extremes of approaches to RPGs that I talked about are fine for the players who like that kind of thing. But I think that the people at those extremes have created the need for those extremes by being bothered by what the people at the other end are doing, where it maybe would be best if everybody relaxed a bit more and
rolled some dice
and let the there's problems with my analogy I just spun too, because we'll maybe wander back to it.
So
is that making sense?
I mean, I feel like, when it comes to terrain and theater of the mind, it's kind of, the theater of the mind is the thing, as you said, that fills the gaps between terrain. But even when you have terrain, you can't have everything on the terrain, so you are building the theater on top of that. So, to my way of thinking, pure theater of the mind is just theater of the mind, is theater without the stage, whereas with terrain, it's theater with the stage. And you can vary when you go to see a play. You have your cardboard cutout castle in the background versus $1 million effects studio stuff. But it's all still theater. Whether they're performing on a beach or they're performing on a stage, it's the same. Just a different backdrop. So yeah, I think that's, for me, that's really what it comes down to, is, again, whatever is enhancing your game. If you're in a game where they're playing terrain and it's become basically a board game and it's just move here, roll for attack, move here, roll for attack, and you don't like that,
you cannot move your miniature through that space, because that little twig of the model tree goes down a quarter inch too far. Well, I'll crawl underneath it. Do you see this miniature in a crawling position? No, that is you. In fact, you scoot along the floor without moving your legs, holding your sword and shield in exactly those positions, right? That would be a ridiculously weird extreme embrace of the props as a depiction of what's going on. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I think as we move into the more technological aspects of the game, where it comes to playing on virtual tabletops, there's going to be a lot more elements of things coming in terms of 3D graphics and different tokens, and you'll be able to upload every single monster in whatever manual there is for the game. All these kinds of things, and that's only going to have another camp that's going to be, it's too much just like a computer game, and it's basically just going to take control. So long as there's someone actually controlling the narrative and moving things around, I think it's basically the same, just prettier.
Yes, that's all. I think that's worth a whole separate discussion. Exactly how far can this hobby move into a VR environment before it might break, because because of either the limitations of that or the additional capabilities of that, right? I mean, RPGs work pretty well in a turn-based kind of approach. There are games out there that use more innovative things, like, you know, that it actually counts seconds, and how many seconds it takes till you get your next action can vary. But even then, if you're in virtual reality, you're going to have your ability to move constrained by some kind of mechanism, unless those clamps are let off and you're able to just run around and swing your sword as much as you like. But that raises big questions about game balance, about could there even be a game master while all that is going on? Does he get to say, everybody stop, I've got to drop a new monster in? Is the game master going to have to be is the game master's reaction time going to become a factor, where if he doesn't press the button that opens the door or press the button that materializes the new creatures that he has planned for his encounter in time, then it breaks the scenario? I mean, I have many questions about how that could ultimately work, which I'm sure they'll all get addressed as we move in that direction.
The one of the things I was thinking is, if you to separate terrain and theater of the mind with one sort of thing, it's really the depiction of emotion. You can't really have the emotional part of a role-playing game with terrain. There's the player's emotional reaction, like, wow, nice terrain, but in terms of the story of the game, I think that's one thing that really will separate the two, is that you can't really do that. Well, I mean,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
One thing that this doesn't directly get at what you're talking about, but let me bring it on board. In my superhero game, I like to make sound effects. And every player, in addition to their miniature and their character sheet, has got a little Ziploc baggie of flat cardboard sound effects of the sounds that their powers make, and also oofs and ahs and those kinds of reaction sounds. And we get screenshots of the tabletop with the miniatures and all these sound effects going off, which starts to get into that territory of more than just a visual depiction. And you could, in theory, I guess, make little counters that have expressions on them if you wanted to drop those down next to your minis and say, well, look, my guy is looking amazed. But is that worth it? Why would you do that when you have the players already sitting around the table with expressions? Maybe on a virtual tabletop where you can have cameras going, but often that uses up so much bandwidth that's probably a limitation that will go away as the technology improves.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, when I speak about the emotion, obviously it's like the emotional impact of what's happening in the story.
Yeah.
Whereas,
right.
I mean,
rather than broadcasting what that character's reaction is.
Yeah.
I get you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think that's just really the one thing where, if you had a hill to die on and you had to be in the camp of, theater of the mind only, that's your kind of go-to argument. It's like, that's what you can't do with terrain.
But why? But then I would turn that around. So why is that so? You have a clear, direct sensory impression of that character's reactions on the face of their player. And having some terrain on the table is just a clear visual depiction of some details of the scene right there on the table. What's the difference?
Exactly. And then, and that's You know, and that's why I like these discussions. You know, it's because you can actually bring out.
I'll tell you another. This is a little more speculative because I can't read people's minds. But you know, there is the camp that wants to play story games, and they're less about mechanics and more about description. And I can see how terrain would get in their way of their play style, theoretically, right? But I wanted to say that that door is made out of wood, right? How come I don't get to say that now? Because now you have put down a thing on the table that has a door that is clearly made of iron, right? I guess I can see how that players who want to play just in the realm of story and not of mechanics care less about the kinds of information you get from terrain that interfaces with mechanics and distances and lines of sight and so on. They care less about that and more about the freedom of being able to describe things themselves, which is taken away by everything else that terrain does. So I guess I could see that. No, I haven't actually encountered that argument, so I'm speculating here that that's a thing.
You're creating a whole new race of people that they're going to take that stance now.
Well, I do, you know, if there's people I disagree with, I do try to at least understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Right? Not that I can always get it right.
Well, one of my feelings is that one of the pillars of role-playing is artistry. And whether it's the art in the actual books, or it's the map drawing, or the character portraits, or that kind of thing that people include, to me, that's a fundamental part of the actual game, is being able to give people a sense of things, a sense of the tone and that kind of stuff of the game. And I think that also extends to the terrain. So if you are playing a game where you want to give people the sense of what the atmosphere in the tavern is, you know, and you plonk down a wooden floor and a whole bunch of minis, and then someone has brought, you know, mutton legs in that have they've actually cooked and have brought it to the game, and another person is playing, you know, music with a guitar or something to that effect, adding to the atmosphere of the game. To me, that's a more immersive experience of what you're actually doing, which, you know, the artistry of those various disciplines feeds into the game itself. What would you think? What are your thoughts on that?
I think I about half agree with you.
Okay.
And on the other half, there's just a concern I have about the industry. So the part where I'm a little cautious about agreeing is I am a small game publisher, right? You know, my stuff is not coming from one of the 3 or 4 big game publishers. So I don't have the kinds of numbers, the sales numbers that are necessary to print in bulk and get the cost of full color books down to where people can afford them. So I don't do my books in color, and yet I'm competing with books that are in all kinds of fancy color with like fancy borders and everything. And I don't want to say I'm resentful of their budget, but it's been true since the early days of role-playing that people tend to buy and own more RPGs than they actually play, right? That's pretty much true of all of us.
Yeah.
And so I'm concerned that there is there is an appeal that is being addressed by the big game publishers with their big glossy full color books to make things that are pretty in preference to making things that are damn good games.
Yeah.
Right. And so I sort of reactionary. I don't want my role-playing books to ever wind up on somebody's coffee table as, you know, as a conversation piece, right?
It's just ephemera,
I care to, huh?
It's just ephemera then, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, I mean, there's nothing wrong with people buying books of art.
Yeah.
To have cool art, right? But we're a hobby here where people are doing a particular kind of thing, and as a game designer and artist and publisher, right? For me, the line on what's more important is set way over to where the mechanics and gameplay are more important than the visuals. You know, this came up on Facebook, and people were having a discussion. It brought up the same sort of issue that you raised, that the art can give people a sense of the mood. And I don't know if you were talking about rule books, but I'm taking it that way and reacting to that.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's part of it. I think that's a small part of it. Obviously, that's what hooks you into it. But then when you're playing, it's, you know, then there's different, you know, the different artistries come into play. But
sure, but let me address this, because the part of that statement which does apply to art in rule books is what I was reacting to on this thread on Facebook. You know, people say, no, it's so incredibly important that people get a sense of what the mood of the game should be from its artwork and stuff. And I said, you know how many times, I've been in this industry for 40 years, right? And I've illustrated a lot of other people's games. You know how many times I've been, like, given the manuscript of the rules so I could see how it was gonna play and make artwork that was tuned to go with the way it actually plays? That's exactly 0 times. Publishers are not, at least in my experience, they're not doing that. They are not seeking out artwork that reinforces how their game actually plays. Now, they may seek out artwork that has a mood they like, and they may seek out artwork that depicts the creatures that they want to put in it. But when you sit down at the tabletop, right, you are not looking at those pictures. You are rolling some dice and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a disconnect there, where in theory, I guess you could tune the art so that it reinforces what the game actually is. My fear is that instead, attention is being taken away from the mechanics and put on the artwork. And so, yeah, you've got the benefits sitting around the table of imagining all this awesome artwork that was in the rule book of the game you are playing. But then the actual gameplay has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
You know? So, I'm skeptical of exactly how that all works.
I've definitely heard people say that they won't buy things because of the art on it. They don't like the art, which, again, you know, that sort of is the other side of what you're talking about, really. Is it can turn people away if it's not the right art.
Sure, and you know, and this is me coming into my high horse, right?
Yeah.
Sort of tutting at people who are not sufficiently focused on the game part of the game, where it's none of my business to say that. And these publishers are going, yeah, well, we'll sell more books if we have the fancy, glossy, full color artwork, and they're not wrong. But I just would urge people not to confuse sales with quality. And, you know, as a small game publisher who, you know, I have no real hopes unless somebody drops a ton of money on me for marketing, right? I have no hopes of ever competing with some of these things. What I can compete on is, I imagine to myself, but what the level I'm competing on is in how good is the actual game part of the game. That and even as an artist, I just don't have the resources to fill my books full of the kind of stuff that that they're selling their games on the basis of. And I think it would be better for the hobby if people paid more attention to, hey, you know, we roll these dice and these things happened. Does that make sense? Is that reasonable? Did it you know, how much did the game master have to ignore or throw out or make up rules in order to get a good experience to happen? I think that's all very important, and I don't think it gets enough attention.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to take it as a holistic view of what's going on, and as you say, as a small publisher, it's difficult to budget for something that a larger publisher can do, and that extends beyond just the rule books. You know, for us as quest givers, one of the reasons why we do modules that are not dependent on a specific game is so that our modules can be played in any fantasy role-playing game, which to us is like, that's how we, well, you know, I obviously have made my own little game, and that will come out, and then, you know, there are modules you can play in it straight away. And, you know, there's a lot of publishers out there who will bring out the rule book first, and then months down the line out will come some modules that are tied into that game.
Right.
Because they can't afford to bring them out all at the same time. You know, it's just, that's not feasible.
Yeah, and I you know, again, this is me on my high horse, right? All that stuff you're talking about, it's marketing, man.
Yeah.
That's really not about, are the modules that you're making awesome?
Yeah.
Is the game that you're going to come out with awesome?
Yeah.
Right? Does it play great as written? And, you know,
it has to be that
rules
first.
as written is like a dirty word for a lot of players. That the very idea that the game that they're playing, they ought to be able to rely on it. Are we getting some weird feedback? Getting some weird feedback in my head.
Okay.
Huh. Okay, sorry about that.
That's right.
Let me just move a little back from my microphone or something. Oh yeah, it's half echoing what I say in this like noise in the background.
It could be my microphone picking up. How's that?
Let me start over and try to ignore these this distracting noise. The rules as written is kind of a swear word, a dirty word in the hobby, where people are resentful of the very notion that they should be able to rely on the mechanics of the game that they're playing to produce results that are satisfactory, meaning they make sense and they are fun and exciting and challenging and all that stuff. And I was going somewhere with that point. The noise has gone away, so whatever you did fixed it.
I think my volume was too high.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, it's tough being an artist and a game designer. I want to fight for both sides, but when I'm doing things in the role-playing games industry, then I think the role-playing game-ness of it has to be the more important thing. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I really want, I haven't done this yet, but I want to get back on Facebook in that in the Tabletop RPGers group or wherever it was this thread took place, and urge people out there who have got RPGs that they have released without art or feel they can't release because they can't afford to illustrate them. I want to read those things. I want to have an opportunity to judge some sets of mechanics on the basis of what they actually do. This is all kind of wandering away from the topic of terrain, but to me, that's kind of art after the fact.
Yeah.
You know, that's art art toward the in the service of making the game experience work better, and I'm all in favor of that. I'm just not sure to what extent artwork in a rule book necessarily does that.
Well, in our modules, we actually use terrain photos. So we actually put terrain of the stuff in the story, and we take photographs of it and use that in the module as well as illustrations. So
and you sell that terrain.
Well, the terrain is produced on our channels, so we show people how to make the terrain.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not big enough to have our own terrain making factory somewhere.
So how do you make money at that? Getting back at the marketing question, how do you make money on having videos about making terrain, or don't you? Is it just promotional?
Well, Scotty and I, who were the early people he was first with the DM's craft, and then I came with the DMG info. So he was sort of the start of the role-playing game terrain set of people. Obviously, we had war game terrain people, who've had train people, all that kind of. But this was really the first time on YouTube that you actually started a community of people that do role-playing game terrain. And the Facebook group has grown. It's now just under 30,000 people. My channel has 24,000 subscribers, and Scotty's is over 50,000. And there's other people that have more subscribers than that now. And there are it comes down to monetization as to how do you actually make money from that. When you're running a how-to channel, the first thing is obviously ads, which is not a lot of money, and I never encourage people to try to think that that's going to make you money. Where it comes through is things like affiliates, where you say, here's a tool that you can buy that helps you to cut the thing or glue the stuff or whatever, and then you make a small percentage on that. There's also Patreon, where it's like, support on Patreon and so on and so forth. And there's a variety of different ways of obviously monetizing it. Now, some people say that the monetize it should all be free, and it shouldn't, monetizing this hardcore. But it's like, in order for a channel to survive and be consistent, it needs to have an income in order to make it viable. You can't. Otherwise, it just, it stutters and then becomes problematic. But when we started, we didn't expect it to be tens of thousands of people. When Scotty just put out videos, it was like, you think, well, maybe I'll get a couple of hundred views, and it's, something I'll do one or two of them. He's now got like 700 videos. I've got 350 videos. And then there's other channels that also have hundreds of videos. So it's built this huge community around how to make your terrain yourself. And then coming into that, you've now got 3D people, you've got, like professional artists that are, now selling 3D models of their work that can be printed. And the sub-niche of what we do has ballooned out into 70, 80 plus channels, which... it just goes to show there is actually definitely a market for terrain and people making terrain. And now if you look on Kickstarter, for example, the biggest thing is games and modules, and the second biggest thing is terrain. And people creating terrain you can buy, or STLs for 3D prints or whatever. So it's definitely not something that's going to go away. It's only going to get bigger. And for us, part of the reason why we started Quest Givers was because our channels needed a way for us to show that we're not just terrain people. We actually, are role-playing people, but the problem with having this on our actual channels is it waters down the message of that channel, and then people go, well, I didn't come here for this, I came here for how to glue cardboard to, styrofoam. So it's segmented out, and obviously I've got another channel which is about my game specifically, because most of my subscribers don't want to hear me talk about my game over and over and over again. So
Right.
it's a bit strange, and it's new ground really, because it's the whole influencer model is something that hasn't been around for more than about 5 years in terms
Right.
of social media. Obviously, influential people selling products has been around since the dawn of media, but the way that it's happening now with the internet and the directness of it, that's very, very new. So, obviously then there's companies who want to get in front of our viewers, so there's another avenue for monetizing it. But yeah.
Right. I've stuck my toe into the YouTubing waters a tiny little bit. Streamed like 10 episodes of my V&V Mighty Protectors campaign that I ran, which was set in in Paragon City from the City of Heroes MMO, which is now defunct. That was fun, but it was clear that I would need to invest in, proper equipment in order to do that. We were literally, like nominating somebody at the table to hold the telephone and stream it from that, which is just, it was a little crude. In connection with our Bethorm Plane of Tecumel role-playing game, the Tecumel setting has some very specific, unique visuals in terms of terrain, like the Sakbe roads, which are like a network of Great Walls of China that go all over the Five Empires, and then there's the air cars of the ancients that are like flying cars that you can find and fly around in, and also just some of the buildings and so the architectural style is very unique. So we've come out with some paper model kinds of things. With the air cars, calling it a paper model it's a thing you probably should print out on some pretty stiff cardboard and then cut it out, and you can put it flat in your tabletop, put minis on it, right? But the Sakbe roads, it's a whole kit. Print out these pieces and glue them to foam core and attach them in this way, and now you can have a Sakbe road. So we've done some of that, but not promoting it on YouTube at all. We've just got it sold on Drive-Thru-RPG and linked to from our website. And we'd like to do more of that. My partner, Amanda, is way more of a crafts person than me, but I do a little bit of that. It really enhances the whole product line. It enhances the experience. It can be, and in the case of the Tecumel stuff, if you didn't have that, it'd be significantly harder to do a believable Tecumel-based RPG, because some of the most iconic visuals of the world, how do you present that on the tabletop and give people a sense of what's really going on?
Because the Tecumel sort of mythology, or the actual world, that's been around for quite a long time, hasn't it? I mean, it's...
Yeah.
Was it the 50s?
The Empire of the Petal Throne.
Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me?
Did it start in the 50s?
So Professor M.A.R. Barker was a professor of South Asian Studies at the University of Minnesota, and a longtime science fiction fan and world traveler. He used to go to science fiction conventions in the 50s when they were just starting to be a thing. And he came up with this idea for a series of novels that he wanted to write that were sort of science fiction and fantasy, very heavily inspired by sword and sandal kinds of things, or planetary adventures like the John Carter, Barsoom, stories from Edgar Rice Burroughs. Very heavily inspired by that, and very heavily influenced from like the Flash Gordon movies. Not so much Flash Gordon himself, but the Planet Mongo and Emperor Ming and all that kind of stuff. You know, whenever if you want to get in the mood for a Tech-ML game, one of the things I strongly recommend is just sit down for one of the dance sequences from the old Flash Gordon movie serials, right? Scantily clad women dancing to heavy drum beats in front of the glowering emperor. You're halfway to Tech-ML. So he was working on novels, but he was also a miniatures gamer. Playing tabletop minis for decades already. When Dungeons and Dragons hit at the beginning of the 70s, it showed up at the gaming clubs at the University of Minnesota, and he was there to play his tabletop minis, and he said, well, this is awesome. This is a game where you can just like be one hero and have adventures. Come back next week. And he took the original D&D rules and adapted it to the world he'd been working on already for decades for his novels. And TSR got wind of it, and it was Empire of the Petal Throne was published less than a year after original Dungeons and Dragons came out. And it was like a D&D-ish kind of game, but with an entire world setting behind it. So, yeah, it's kind of awesome. I could do a whole rant about how great Tech-ML is.
Well, can you give us a little bit of a background on Cave Master? And then that can round out the video.
Sure. So Cave Master is our Paleolithic role-playing game in every sense of the word. You don't just play a character who is a caveman. It was literally conceived as a set of role-playing rules that cavemen could have come up with and played. So the resolution, where you don't get a character sheet, because cavemen did not have copying machines where you could have an elaborate form to fill out. You get an animal skin, which is, you print it out on your printer. It's a blank animal skin outline, and then you grab a charred stick from the fire or a pen, and scrawl some circles with pictograms in them on your character skin, and those represent your character's different abilities. And then you are issued for character generation, you're issued, I think we give you 5 or 6 pebbles that you put in those circles. And the number of pebbles in each circle shows how good you are at that thing. And the mechanic is, when you're faced with some challenge, the Cave Master has a number of pebbles which represent the difficulty of the task. And you pick up the pebbles from your character skin that are the abilities you can bring to bear to succeed at that task. You each split your pebbles between your 2 hands, either all in one or split 50-50 or one in one and the rest in the other, however you want to do it. And then the player picks one of the Cave Master's hands. Cave Master picks one of the player's hands. You reveal, and compare. And that's the mechanic. And you now know 90% of the rules of Cave Master.
It's a beautiful little game.
Thank you. And there's more to it than that, right? I mean, we have a kind of simplistic hit location system if you want to do called shots. Then there's some combat strategies that come into play, and so on. So there's more to it than just always the boring, repetitious comparison of number of pebbles, but and the rule book is really not necessary anymore once you've learned the mechanics, except as a reference for things of the Pleistocene. Because of course, cavemen wouldn't have needed the book; they'd have just needed to know the rules because they already understand like what are the abilities of a cave bear. And everything in the game, therefore, comes with like a little short paragraph of how do you stat this thing up. And we've got that for creatures and for player characters and for weapons. There's just a simple little formula. Think about what it can do. Here's how many stones it gets in the different abilities. Boom, you're done. So they didn't need the rule book. They just know the rules and make stuff up as they went.
I was just impressed with the research thing at the back of the book, with all the different people that were, you know, thanked for their help in, you know, providing detail to the game.
Well, we did extensive research, including visiting like an archaeological dig near our hometown, and helping one day. Unfortunately, the day we went was just after it had rained, and so the help that we provided was like shoveling mud out of the trench where they were digging. We didn't get to do anything really exciting.
Finally!
Yeah, so... and that you know, that was kind of partly my motivation behind that design, was driven by my concerns about the industry moving toward more and more expensive rule books and more expensive paraphernalia that you need to have. Like if you have to have special dice, or you have to have a special set of cards, or you have to have special character sheets, or little booklets for recording your character in, or whatever all the big publishers are coming up with to suck more money out of the pockets of their fans, right? I wanted to do something that was like a real reaction against that. So literally, you barely need the rule book. You don't need it at all once you've learned the mechanics. And for everything else, you can just be you can crash land in the Andes and play Cave Master if you have learned the rules once. So
yeah, for the terrain, you can be on the beach and just be drawing the map in the sand.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I encourage that. That's how cavemen did it. So.
Well, thank you once again for joining me on this, Jeff. It's obviously you know, something I've enjoyed immensely, and yeah, hopefully we can do it again. So, is there anything else you'd like to add? As you know, things that are currently available, or
just in case, I'll mention that I do freelance artwork. So if you need your character drawn, or if you're publishing something and you're looking for illustrations, I'm available. Let me just quick tell you what my website is. Hang on. It's well, you know what? The easy thing to do is just drop me a line on Facebook. Send me a message on Facebook, or email me at unigames@prism. prismnet.com, and let me know you're interested, and I'll send you all the information, because I could use more work of that kind.
Jeff is a wonderful artist. He has been working in the industry for a very long time and has experience in a range of different games. I've been a fan of his art for a long time, before I even knew that it was his art. So it's it's wonderful speaking to you again, Jeff, and we'll thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks very much for having me on. Bye, everybody.